Hi, I'm Dave. These are books. The complete title of this book is Known and Unknown, a memoir. The author is Donald Rumsfeld. It was published in 2011. It's a new book. It should be known that Donald Rumsfeld is donating his proceeds from the sales of Known and Unknown to the military charities supported by the Rumsfeld Foundation. I have always enjoyed the speaking style of Donald Rumsfeld, so I was looking forward to reading this book when I heard it had been released. For the most part, I was not disappointed. There are times, particularly during the discussion of his years of service with President Ford, when I found there to be a lot of he said, she said stuff in the text. That gets tiring. I can say that two of Mr. Rumsfeld's most frequently used words are unwise and unhelpful. The descriptions of conversations, meetings, and decisions made while serving as Secretary of Defense under President George W. Bush were of interest to me. It appears that, to Mr. Rumsfeld, there can be no higher praise for any individual than that he or she went to Princeton and or that he or she participated in athletics, particularly in wrestling. Donald Rumsfeld is very accurate in his description of an attitude pervasive among the locals in the area of his and my birth. Yet, amid the city's diversity, Chicagoans shared a common trait, a decidedly unfriendly attitude to the pretensions of aristocratic Europe. Many in Chicago were Irish at that time, and the local politicians gloried in mocking the English, and the British seemed to reciprocate. Having seen it, the British writer Rudyard Kipling sniffed after visiting Chicago, I urgently desire never to see it again. It is inhabited by savages. The author demonstrates a clear vision of what our goals in Iraq should have been. When it came to the administration's goals in Iraq, my views were straightforward. They were to help the Iraqis put in place a government that did not threaten Iraq's neighbors, did not support terrorism, was respectful to the diverse elements of Iraqi society, and did not proliferate weapons of mass destruction. Period. The aim was not to bestow on it an American-style democracy, a capitalist economy, or a world-class military force. If Iraqis wanted to adapt their government to reflect the liberal democratic traditions espoused by Thomas Jefferson and Adam Smith, we could start them on their way and then wish them well. On the subject of Iraq, Mr. Rumsfeld further elaborates, I proposed that we talk more about freedom and less about democracy, lest the Iraqis and other countries in the region think we intended to impose our political system on them, rather than their developing one better suited to their history and culture. Similarly, the author's vision for Afghanistan was clear. My position was that we were not in Afghanistan to transform a deeply conservative Islamic culture into a model of liberal modernity. We were not there to eradicate corruption or to end poppy cultivation. We were not there to take ownership of Afghanistan's problems, tempting though it was for many Americans of goodwill. Instead, Afghans would need to take charge of their own fate. Afghans would build their society the way they wanted. With our coalition allies, we would assist them, within reason, where we were able. Here are some of my favorite quotes from the book. Quote, if a problem has no solution, it is not a problem to be solved, but a fact to be coped with over time. Quote, Beirut demonstrated to me the profound truth that weakness is provocative. Quote, and we learned the Lone Ranger credo. I believe that to have a friend, a man must be one, that all men are created equal, and that everyone has within himself the power to make this a better world, that God put the firewood there, but that every man must gather and light it himself. 7 decades later, it is still not a bad philosophy. Quote, as our son saw for the first time what passed for typical swim attire for women on the Mediterranean beach, his expression was one of amazed innocence. He had not seen anything like that along the shores of Lake Michigan. Quote, the good news is the war is over, he said. The bad news is we lost. Quote, if you do something, someone won't like it. Quote, Washington, D.C. is 60 square miles surrounded by reality. Quote, only 1/3 of the world is asleep at any given time, and the other 2/3 is up to something. Quote, if you want traction, you must first have friction. Quote, the Cold War is over, said the old Cold Warrior, but it is not won. Quote, sometimes you have to kill a chicken to frighten the monkeys. Quote, in my view, our political motivation was self-defense, not vengeance, retaliation, or punishment. Quote, terrorism is a form of warfare and must be treated as such. Quote, terrorism was also not the enemy, but a tactic our enemies were using successfully against us. Quote, we ought not to make a career out of transforming Afghanistan. Quote, bringing democracy to Iraq had not been among the primary rationales. Quote, complaints without tangible recommendations for solutions were generally unhelpful. Quote, when Barack Obama, for example, assumed the responsibilities of commander-in-chief in 2009, he found that making policy was much different from making speeches. Quote, since 9/11, we had made manhunting and the skills needed to track, find, isolate, fix, and capture or finish individuals a priority for our military. Quote, if you don't like change, you'll like irrelevance a lot less. Quote, one of the many paradoxes of modern counterinsurgency, Vickers wrote, is that less is often more. Quote, but I took pains to try not to micromanage with the proverbial 5,000-mile screwdriver. Quote, I have benefited greatly from criticism, and at no time have I suffered from a lack thereof. Quote, what I want to hear from you, Bush said firmly, is how we're going to win, not how we're going to leave. I enjoyed reading Known and Unknown, a memoir. With the exception of the aforementioned he said, she said micro-exposés, I think Mr. Rumsfeld explained where he was coming from and why and how. This book held my interest. Of course, it was written with 20/20 hindsight, but that is the nature of a memoir. I recommend Known and Unknown, a memoir, very highly, particularly to those with an interest in learning from history. Once again, the title is Known and Unknown, a memoir. The author is Donald Rumsfeld, and it was published in 2011. It's a new book. I liked it. I recommend it very highly. I'm Dave. These are books.